Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles, which shavings slowly drifted down in the afternoon sun, like golden raindrops sprinkled throughout the workshop. Oliver Thompson's fingers run gently over the surface of the oak, feeling the subtle undulations in the grain of the wood. These imperfections, imperceptible to the casual observer, are invisible under his rough fingertips. The roar of the machines in the workshop was like a familiar symphony to him, a piece of music that he had written with his own hands over the past 20 years. The aroma of fresh wood wafting through the air, mixed with the smells of varnish and motor oil, make up the unique scent that belongs to this space. Wood shavings fell from his dark blue coveralls and settled in the folds of his muscular forearms. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling cast his tall figure on the floor, creating long shadows between the workbenches. That's when his 15-year-old daughter, Emily's voice pierced through the roar of the machine. "Daddy, look what I did." Emily held a small wooden box aloft, her green eyes shining with pride. She inherited her mother's blonde hair but has the shape of her father's eyes, a perfect testament to their love for each other. Oliver put down the carefully polished sandalwood grips in his hands and wiped his hands on his work pants. "Let me see the craftsmanship." He took the wooden box and scrutinized every detail. Sunlight pours through the glass windows high above the wooden box, reflecting the natural grain of the wood. "You've improved. Those edges are joined perfectly. The craftsmanship is very close to professional level." A pleased smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. "I learned from the best master." Emily hopped up on the workbench and swung her legs around lazily, just like she used to do when she was a kid. The dust from the workshop danced in the sunlight behind her, gilding her. Mom called to say she's not coming home for dinner again tonight, saying she has a charity event with Isabella. She tried to keep her tone light as she said this, but a hint of loss still came through. Oliver's jaw tensed several times imperceptibly. He turned to organize his tools, hiding the haze that flashed in his eyes. "So it's just us father and daughter tonight. Want to grill something? Last week you said you wanted barbecued ribs," he said in a pretense of lightheartedness, trying to change the subject. The wood shavings on the workbench were casually swept to the floor by him, as if sweeping away the gloom in his mind. The mention of Sarah's absence no longer surprised him. Over the past year, his wife's social calendar has gotten busier and busier, with activities that seem to multiply like rabbits. She comes from a famous family, one of those old money families that look down on crafters. Even after years of marriage, those people still viewed him, a carpenter, in a condescending light. He remembered vividly the first time she walked into the store as if it were yesterday. It was a sunny spring morning when she came to order a customized dining table set in a well-tailored suit, high heels, and meticulously manicured nails. All the dust in the workshop seemed out of place with her presence. "Are you sure you want this material?" he asked then, noting her expensive tastes and slightly reserved smile. "I know what quality is," she replied, her slender fingers brushing over a finished table with an appreciative gleam in her eye. "And your craftsmanship, it's outstanding. Each piece is like a work of art." Her gaze turned from the table to him with a hint of curiosity and admiration. In that moment, time seemed to stand still. They fell in love as quickly as a tornado sweeps across the plains. She seemed to see right through to the inside of his rough exterior, or so he'd always thought. He'd given her everything: his heart, his trust, his loyalty, values he'd honed during his years in the foster care system. In that world of the weak and the strong, betrayal was a means of survival and trust was a luxury few could afford. The vibration of Emily's cell phone brought him back from his memories. The sun was still warm, but the air in the workshop was suddenly heavy. He noticed her face suddenly turn pale as she read the message, like a frosted flower. "What's wrong?" Oliver asked as he set down the small wooden box, a sense of foreboding rising in his mind. Emily's fingers trembled slightly. "Nothing." "Emily," his voice was authoritative, yet gently concerned, an unspoken agreement that had developed between them over the years. She hesitated, as if weighing something, then turned the phone toward him. On the screen was a group chat message, the piercing text making his heart skip a beat. "Oh my God, just saw Mrs. Thompson and James Carter getting very close in Lemoyne." Oliver's expression remained calm, but something churned under his eyes, like an undercurrent beneath the calm waters. "Who is James Carter?" His voice was surprisingly calm, as if inquiring about the day's weather. "It's that real estate developer who's been on the local news a lot. Mom mentioned him at the dinner table last month." Emily's voice trailed off, like she was afraid that saying the name would set off something uncontrollable. "Dad, it's probably just work," Oliver said, but his mind was already uncontrollably sorting through the signs he deliberately ignored. The late-night activities, the new clothes, the distracted glances, and the increasing number of work messages on his cell phone. The pieces began to fit together like polished blocks of wood into a heartbreaking picture. "What if it's not?" Emily asked, her voice a little shaky, her green eyes pooling with tears. Oliver placed his hands on her shoulders, holding them steady, just as he'd done when he'd taught her to use the tools. "Then we'll face it together, like we always have." He took her into his arms, his tall form enveloping her as if to isolate her from the entire world. Where she couldn't see it, his expression grew dangerous, shedding a hint of the man he had been. The man he had been before this quiet life. That night, after Emily has gone to bed, Oliver sits alone in the workshop, the moonlight spilling onto the floor through the high windows and casting eerie shadows between the machines. A glass of whiskey sat by his side in its original state, the amber liquid refracting a faint light in the glass. He pulled out his cell phone and opened the rarely used social media, his thumbs swiping mechanically across the screen. Sure enough, there it was, a photo from a charity dinner 2 weeks ago, Sarah radiant in a tailored red gown, standing next to a tall man with perfect hair and a tailored suit. James Carter. The photo caption reads, "Oak Haven's finest support children's education." Oliver zoomed in on the photo, scrutinizing their body language. The slight tilt, James' hand resting in an overly familiar way near Sarah's waist, the smile on her face much brighter than it usually was at home. His fingers gripped the phone so tightly that his knuckles were white as if he were holding a hammer that was about to fall. The next morning, Sarah walks into the kitchen with the energy of a morning workout as Oliver prepares breakfast. She wore pricey yoga pants and designer-branded sports tops, and her blonde hair was immaculately groomed even in the early morning. Sunlight poured in through the kitchen window, enveloping her entire being in a golden glow. "Oliver, we need to talk about what Emily saw," she said as she skillfully poured herself coffee, moving with the grace of a demonstration of something. He cracked the eggs into the pan, moving smoothly as if it were just a perfectly ordinary morning. The sound of a nuisance filled the silence between the two. "Yes? It's not what you think. James and I were discussing the community center project with Isabella and the others present." She touched his arm, a gesture that had once made his heart race and now only sent a tingle through him. "You know how people in small towns love to gossip." Oliver turned to face her, his dark eyes examining her face. In the morning light, as if for the first time, he could see clearly the fine lines and carefully concealed exhaustion on her face. "Really?" Sarah's smile is slightly flustered, like a poorly handled timber interface that reveals a breach. "Of course, my dear. Don't be so suspicious. Such suspicion doesn't suit you." He noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her coffee cup and the way she wouldn't meet his eyes. During his long years in a foster home, he learned to read people's micro-expressions and recognize lies before they became knives in the back. "It's a must for survival." "You're right." His voice was deliberately calm. Like the surface of a well-polished board, small towns do love to gossip. The look of relief swept over her face too quickly, so quickly that it was almost impossible to catch, but he caught it. "That's it. Well, I have a lunch meeting, but I'll be back for dinner tonight." As she left, Oliver watched her through the window, noting that she immediately checked her cell phone as soon as she entered the valuable sedan, a smile on his face that he hadn't seen in a long time. His hands, strong from years of carpentry, gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. This home, this life, had been built bit by bit from nothing, sculpted as carefully as he had crafted his finest work. If someone tries to destroy it, they'll understand why people called him the Hammer before he became a carpenter. The most beautiful pieces are built with the most basic tools, and sometimes the simplest tools can cause the most damage. The sunlight faded through the kitchen window, and Oliver still gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. Through the window, he could see that Sarah's car had disappeared around the corner, leaving only a trail of exhaust behind. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in a long time. "Daniel, I need your help." The roar of an engine came from the other end of the line as his old friend worked on a car. "After you drop Emily off at school, come to my workshop. There are some things we need to talk about in person." Half an hour later, Daniel's pickup was parked outside the workshop. The words, "Blacksmith Auto Repair," faded. He wiped his motor oil-stained hands and walked in, an anchor tattooed on his sturdy arm, a mark of their shared past. The aroma of fresh wood shavings filled the workshop, and a few rays of sunlight penetrated the dust of the high windows. "I heard about the photos." Daniel went straight to the point, a suppressed anger in his voice. "I didn't want to talk about it, but since it's already happened, I saw Sarah's car at the Golden Oaks Hotel. That was 2 afternoons ago." Oliver's hand stopped on a piece of mahogany that was being sanded, and the sound of sandpaper rubbing together came to an abrupt halt. The workshop was suddenly so quiet that you could hear birds chirping in the distance. The exact time? His voice sounded like it was coming from far away. It was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and she wasn't alone. The conspicuous silver sports car was parked next to her, and I recognized it as Carter's car. Daniel met his old friend's gaze. "Want me to keep an eye out for you? I can get a couple of my old buddies to help." "No," Oliver continued sanding the wood, each movement precise and forceful, as if he were trying to pour all of his emotions into it. "I want you to gather information for me. James Carter, his real estate projects, everything you can find. Every detail, every document, no matter how insignificant it may seem." Wood shavings flew through the air like a silent snowstorm. The roar of machines rose and fell in the background, muffling the sound of the two men's muffled conversation. "I know Jimmy from City Hall. He's in the records department." Daniel leaned over the workbench, a wry glint in his eyes. "The kid owes me a few favors. Want me to ask?" The light from the workshop stretched his shadow, casting it against the wall of stacked lumber. "Go ahead," Oliver said as he put down the sandpaper and picked up a rag to carefully wipe the surface of the wood. "But be careful not to alarm anyone. We're going to treat it like we did this piece of wood slowly, sanding layer by layer." He points to the mahogany on his workbench. "By now the surface is smooth as a mirror. The best work always requires patience. Like this piece of wood, the surface shine is just the beginning. The real art lies in the unseen details." It's noon. The sun is poisonous, and Emily texts, "Mom wants to have lunch with me and says she has some explaining to do." Oliver stood at the window, looking out at the hot, steamy tarmac outside the workshop and replied, "Go ahead, but remember our agreement. Keep in touch." He put his phone down, knowing that Sarah would try to explain, would try to maintain the image of the perfect mother in front of her daughter. It didn't matter that Emily had seen the cracks in the truth as clearly as she had seen the grain in the wood. Some things, once seen, cannot be turned away. In the afternoon, Daniel returned with a stack of papers, his undershirt soaked with sweat. "These are Carter's development program records for the last 3 years." He spread the papers out on the workbench, the yellow paper rustling on the wooden surface. "Some of the numbers don't look right." Oliver scrutinized each document, his fingers skimming over each line of numbers as if reading the grain of wood, pausing at certain points to tap. Here, he pointed to a project. The bid price was significantly off-market, yet easily approved. And here, he flipped to another page. The project budget was overrun by nearly 50%, yet there was no record of any questioning. "And that's not all." Daniel lowered his voice and looked around. Even though it was just the two of them in the workshop, Jimmy said that someone deliberately cleaned up some of the records, but he kept backups. "There's a common investor behind all of these projects, and guess who it is?" Oliver gave a sneer. "There's always a stain hiding under the surface of perfection, like poorly varnished wood. Sooner or later it will show." His cell phone suddenly vibrated, and the screen lit up with a message from Sarah. "We need to talk. James' father is angry. He could ruin your career. Think of Emily. For her sake, call it a day." Oliver stares at the screen, fingers tapping on the keyboard. "A threat? That's interesting. Guess I didn't do my job well enough." She's starting to get scared, Daniel observed his friend's expression, a flash of concern in his eyes. The Carter family is very powerful in this city. They can keep you from taking any orders. Power? Oliver sneered and walked over to a dust-cloth-covered workbench in the corner, lifting the fabric to reveal an unfinished piece of black walnut. See this? The hardest of woods requires the sharpest of tools and a whole lot of patience. The Carter family may control the real estate in this city, but they don't understand people like us. Later that night, Emily came home with confusion and a hint of anger on her face. There was only one table lamp on in the workshop, casting long shadows on the woodworking machines. Mom said it was all a misunderstanding, that James was just helping her with a charity project. She sat at her workbench with a cup of hot chocolate in both hands. She said they just have a working relationship and that you're being too sensitive. Oliver put down the tool in his hand and wiped the wood shavings from his hand. What else did she say? Said you didn't understand her social circle, said she needed to build her own network. There was a hint of anger in Emily's voice. She thinks I'm still a kid who doesn't know anything. Oliver took his daughter into his arms and felt her tremble slightly. The faint aroma of wood wafted through the workshop, a smell they knew best. Sometimes people think that a carefully disguised lie is the truth, just as some people can't tell the difference between real wood and veneered junk lumber. But we know that, right? The truth, like the grain of wood, never lies. Emily nodded, feeling safe in her father's arms, just as she had as a child. The next morning, before dawn, Daniel brought more news. His pickup parked silently behind the workshop, the vibration of the engine startling a few early morning sparrows. 3 of Carter's development projects are suspected to be in violation, he said as he set down a fresh stack of papers, the folders stained with coffee. And I've noticed that a lot of those charitable events Sarah's been attending are related to those projects. Every fundraising dinner, every social event, it's like an elaborate chess game. She's his social cover, Oliver said, the chisel in his hand slicing precisely into the wood with a soft click. And now we're going to make that cover start to crack. Like this piece of wood, it appears to be intact, but with the right spot and a light strike, we can expose the hollows within. The workshop echoed with his steady voice, mixed with the first rays of the morning sun. He picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. The phone rang for a long time before being picked up. Isabella, his voice was surprisingly calm, like he was discussing the weather. I think we need to talk about your husband's offshore accounts and your role in Sarah's charitable foundation. There was silence on the other end of the line for a few moments, and then a shaky voice said, "What do you want? How did you know?" "The truth," Oliver said, running his fingers over the grain of the wood, "is as simple as that. And I guess you're tired of keeping secrets, aren't you?" He could hear sharp breathing on the other end of the line. "Tomorrow at noon, my workshop. We'll have a good chat." He hung up and turned to Daniel. "The pieces are starting to move. Isabella will be our eyes and ears. She'll tell us every move Sarah and James make. Are you sure this is the right thing to do?" Daniel leaned back on his workbench, his brow furrowed. "Once you start, there's no turning back. It's not just exposing an affair, you're destroying their entire world." Oliver walks toward the workshop window, the morning light stretching his shadow. Outside the workshop, the town is waking up and scattered pedestrians are starting to appear on the streets. Remember the first lesson we learned in the foster home? Never believe what's on the surface. I've spent so many years trying to forget those lessons, trying to believe in the goodness of humanity. He turned, a dangerous glint in his eyes. Now it's time to pick up those skills again. A week later, the first pieces began to fall. Isabella, offhandedly, mentions an anomaly in one of James' projects at a charity luncheon, and the news spreads like wildfire through Oak Haven's high society. The small-town gossip begins to change direction, and those who once envied Sarah begin to whisper. That night, Sarah texted Oliver overnight. "What the hell are you trying to do? Stop or it's all over." Oliver sits in his workshop surrounded by the furniture he has crafted over the years, each piece representing his quest for perfection. The light from the table lamp jumps across the surface of the wood, outlining the beautiful grain. "No," he said softly, "this is just beginning." He picked up a new piece of wood and began to sand it carefully. Like working with wood, He had to peel away the false surface of the years, layer by layer, until the true grain underneath was revealed. Early the next morning, Daniel brought new news. The morning mist had not yet cleared, and his footsteps echoed in the empty workshop. "City Hall's starting to look into Carter's program," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. "And Jimmy said someone anonymously provided some key documents." Oliver nodded and continued to focus on the task at hand. He knew that in this town, news traveled faster than a virus. Soon, those who once treated James with respect will begin to whisper behind his back. And that's just the beginning. Like a carefully crafted piece of furniture, every part needs to fit perfectly and every detail cannot be faulted. Oliver knows that what he's making isn't a piece of furniture, but a sophisticated device to make betrayers eat their own. When all the pieces fit together in place, Sarah and James' carefully constructed world will fall apart under the weight like rotting wood. In the woodshop, the machines roar to life. A new day begins, and Oliver's plan for revenge will continue to unfold in the sunshine. The early morning sunlight had just poured into the workshop when Oliver heard the sound of rushed footsteps. Daniel bursts in, clutching a copy of the local morning paper. "You've got to see this." The front page of the newspaper bore the big headline, "Prominent realtor James Carter suspected of project fraud." Oliver took the paper and ran his carpenter's rough fingers gently over the words whose ink had not yet dried. "The reporter did a thorough job," Daniel said. "The project bids, the flow of funds, the government connections, every detail was verified." Oliver nodded and kept reading. The report not only exposed James' corrupt behavior, but also mentioned the money behind those charity dinners. Sarah's name doesn't come up directly, but multiple charitable events she was involved in organizing were included in the investigation. "The Carter family is holding an emergency board meeting," Daniel added, with a hint of excitement in his voice. "And old Carter is so pissed he almost had a heart attack." The roar of the machines in the workshop seemed to sharpen, as if echoing the tense morning. Oliver placed the newspaper on the workbench, picked up a piece of unfinished oak, and began sanding it intently. Wood shavings fluttered in the morning light like golden dust. "Do you know why fine woods are especially valuable?" he asked suddenly. "Because they stand the test of time, whereas inferior goods," he pointed to the newspaper, "will always reveal themselves." As he was talking, his cell phone vibrated. Sarah's text arrived as expected. "Are you crazy? Do you realize what you're destroying?" Oliver looked at the screen, a sneer playing at the corner of his mouth. He replied, "I'm just letting the truth come out. Wasn't it you who always said the town loved to gossip? Now they have more topics to discuss." News spreads like wildfire in Oak Haven. By noon, the whole town was talking about the scandal. Isabella sends a message as promised, describing the reaction of the high society circle. Sarah is in a complete panic. She's calling everyone to try and do damage control, but no one will answer her calls. Even the Weekend Arts Foundation dinner has been canceled. "The pieces are starting to fall," Oliver said to Daniel. "Watch next." He knew James wouldn't sit still. Sure enough, a black sedan pulled up outside the workshop in the middle of the afternoon. James Carter's father, one of the most powerful men in the city, paid a personal visit. "Mr. Thompson," said old Carter with suppressed anger in his voice, "let's talk." Oliver signaled Daniel to leave and ushered the visitor into the office. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting streaks of shadow across old Carter's wrinkled face. "My son may have been a little reckless in his actions," Carter Sr. said as he got right to the point. "But these allegations are outrageous. Do you realize how much damage this could cause?" Oliver leaned against his desk, his fingers still stained with wood shavings, a stark contrast to Carter Sr.'s tailored suit. "Loss?" he said softly. "Greater loss than betraying a family?" Old Carter's expression changed. "Look, we can make a deal. What do you want? Money? A contract? A new workshop?" Oliver shook his head. "I want something you can't give. Integrity, loyalty. How much are those worth in your world?" Just then, Emily rushed into the office, her face pale. "Dad." Her voice trembled. "James is outside the school. He looks drunk and is swearing loudly." Carter Sr.'s face instantly turned ugly. "Damn it, this stupid bastard." He pulled out his cell phone and was about to make a call. No. Oliver's voice was cold as ice. I'll take care of it. He grabbed his jacket and scowled at Daniel. Emily, go stay in Daniel's office. On the road, Daniel drives and Oliver sits in the passenger seat, both silent. When they arrived at the school, James was leaning against his sports car, tie askew, bottle of wine swinging from his hand. Seeing Oliver get out of the car, James grinned. Coming? A hypocrite? Who do you think you are? Nothing but a broken carpenter. Before he could say anything, security guards had arrived to evacuate the crowd of students. Oliver stood still, remaining disturbingly calm. You're drunk, James? Go home. Home? James laughed. My home is going down. My career is going down the drain. It's all because of you. He stumbled closer, stinking of alcohol. You ruined everything. Now it's my turn to ruin everything for you. He suddenly pulled something out of his arms. It happened fast. Daniel yelled, "Look out!" and the object in James' hand reflected a metallic sheen. But before he could do anything, Oliver made his move. 20 years of carpentry have given him not only skill, but quick reflexes and a strong arm. James' wrists were twisted and the knife fell to the floor as his entire body was pinned to the ground. Did you get the shot? Oliver asked without looking back. Daniel held up his cell phone and nodded. Full video. The sound of sirens came from far away as James was still struggling and cursing on the ground. Oliver leaned down and whispered in his ear, Your father was just at my workshop, trying to smooth things over. Now well, you've given the police a new reason. The police came quickly, and this time there was no one to protect James. Carter Sr. finally gave up his last struggle after seeing a video of his son causing trouble with a knife in front of the school. Later that evening, the news reported James Carter's arrest, while revealing more details about his company's violations. Sarah sends Oliver one last message after all this. You win. You ruined everyone's lives. Oliver looks at his cell phone screen and remembers all those years of silence in the workshop, the way Emily played in the wood chips when she was a little girl, the days of betrayal and deception. No, he replied, you are the ones who chose this path. I'm just letting the truth see the light of day. The next day, Isabella arrives at the workshop with the expected news. Sarah's social circle has completely collapsed, with former close friends cutting her off in droves. She tries to contact everyone, Isabella says, but no one will take her calls. She's like a quarantined patient now. Oliver continues to work intently, the sandpaper in his hand moving back and forth across the surface of the wood. Know what? He said, in the woodworking business, the most important thing is not skill, but honesty. You've got to be honest with the wood, honest with the tools, and most importantly, honest with yourself. The problem with Sarah and James is that they're never honest with anyone. Daniel leaned against the doorframe and watched his best friend concentrate on her work. Is that the end of it? He asked. Oliver looks up, looking out at the sunlight through the high windows. No, not yet. True craftsmanship is not in destroying, but in creating. Next, we're going to start rebuilding. He picked up a new piece of wood, a material he had never tried before. Emily said she wanted to learn more about woodworking. Maybe it's time to teach her some new skills. The police investigation continues, but life in Oak Haven is returning to normal. The focus of the debate shifted from the scandal to more practical topics. In the workshop, the roar of the machines remains, and wood chips continue to flutter in the sun. Oliver knows that this storm hasn't completely passed, but the hardest part is over. Like dealing with a difficult piece of wood, sometimes it takes more than brute force, but patience and wisdom. That evening, Emily helped clean up at the workshop. Daddy, she said suddenly, did you plan this all along? Oliver put down his tools and looked his daughter in the eye. No, he said, I just follow the grain of the wood. Some things, like wood, you can't force it to be the way you want it to be. You just have to follow its nature and let the truth come out naturally. Emily nodded thoughtfully and began sweeping the wood chips off the floor. In the twilight, the silhouettes of father and daughter elongated and blended together in the workshop like a perfect painting. The shadows of evening crept up the workshop's window ledges, and wood shavings fluttered in the last rays of sunlight. Emily packed up her last handful of tools and was ready to go home. On the workbench lay an assortment of woodworking tools, which glowed warmly in the dim light. Just then, her cell phone rang and the word "Mom" appeared on the screen. She looked hesitantly to Oliver, who was painting a precious piece of black walnut with skill and concentration. "Take it," he said, not taking his eyes off the work in his hands. "Some things have to be faced. It's like this piece of wood. Even if it's hard to handle, it has to be polished bit by bit." The smell of varnish in the air, mixed with the crisp scent of wood shavings, made up the unique smell of the space. Emily took a deep breath and hit the answer button. Sarah's voice dripped with exhaustion and pleading. "Honey, can we meet? Just the two of us. There's so much I want to say to you. So much has happened in the meantime." Her voice trembled slightly, as if she were suppressing some emotion. Emily glanced at her father, who was still focused on the task at hand, but she knew he was listening. "Fine," she replied, her voice surprisingly calm, "but it has to be in a public place. You pick the place." She could hear Sarah's sigh of relief on the other end of the line. The next day at noon, the sun was shining, and Emily met Sarah at the Bluebird Cafe in the center of town. The once radiant mother now looked much more haggard, and the elaborate makeup couldn't hide the shadows under her eyes. Her Chanel suit was still perfect, but her whole body looked a little constricted, like a well-made but ill-fitting dress. "You look well," Sarah tried to smile, her fingers fidgeting uneasily with her coffee cup. "How is your father?" "Business at the workshop." Emily watched her mother, looking at the new wrinkles on her face. That once high-spirited face now carried a vulnerability she had never seen before. "Come on, Mom." Emily looked her mother straight in the eye, her voice so calm it made Sarah a little uneasy. "You don't really care about any of this? What are you trying to say?" The surrounding aroma of coffee and soft jazz music suddenly became harsh. Sarah's fingers traced unconsciously over her coffee cup, her carefully manicured nails making a subtle sound on the porcelain. "Your father. He's not who you think he is." She lowered her voice. "He's using this to get back at me and James. He's ruining everyone's lives. Look at all the stories in the papers, the investigations." Emily let out a soft laugh, one that carried a calmness beyond her years and a hint of sarcasm. "Ruining lives?" She set down her coffee cup, the porcelain clinking against the tray with a crisp clink. "Who brought that man into our home? Who watched him threaten me and did nothing? What were you thinking then, Mom?" Sarah's face turns pale, and cracks begin to appear in her carefully crafted mask. "It was an accident, James. He just got carried away. He's actually a good guy. He's just been under a lot of stress lately." Her voice was getting smaller and smaller, like she was trying to convince herself. "It wasn't an accident," Emily interrupted, her voice firm as a sharp chisel. "It was a choice. Just like you chose to betray Dad, chose to side with that man. Now that their crimes have been exposed, his hypocrisy and corruption laid out in the sunlight, you're just going to pretend nothing happened? You're too young to understand the complexities of the grown-up world." Sarah reached out to touch her daughter's hand, but was gently dodged. "Some things aren't black and white. Between your father and I." Emily stood up and looked down at her mother, the sunlight slanting in through the window, casting deep shades of light on her face. "Yes, I understand. Like the grain of wood, it may seem complicated, but the essence never lies. Dad taught me that." She grabbed her bag and got ready to leave. "And Mom, stop saying I'm young. Your choices have forced me to grow up fast." The moment Emily leaves the cafe, the news that James has been granted bail spreads through the town like wildfire. Daniel called immediately, tension in his voice. "He's in a drunken stupor at the Old Oak bar talking about making you pay. I've got people on him, but the guy's like a ticking time bomb right now." Oliver put the phone down and continued to focus on the wood on his workbench. The rays of the setting sun poured in through the high windows, casting a golden-red glow over the entire workshop. The aroma of fresh wood chips filled the air, and the roar of the machines quieted. As night fell, the roar of car engines came from outside the workshop, and the sound of tires running over gravel was particularly harsh. He didn't look up as he continued the work in his hands, the sound of sandpaper rubbing against wood standing out in the silence. Footsteps approached from the back door, accompanied by drunken cursing and the sound of knocking over tools. The air suddenly became heavy, like the calm before a storm. "Come out." James' voice echoed in the empty workshop, hoarse with alcohol and anger. "Let's settle this. Like men." Oliver slowly lowered his tools and turned to face his visitor. The light from the work lamp cast James' shadow on the wall, distorted and grim. James stood there, his expensive tailored suit rumpled, his tie askew, his eyes cloudy and crazy. He held something in his hand, glowing coldly metallic in the dim light. "You know what?" Oliver said calmly, with an unnerving composure in his voice. "It's not the tools that are most dangerous when working with wood, it's the impatience." James raises the pistol in his hand, the blackened muzzle aimed at Oliver's chest. "Don't give me that crap," he yelled, his voice stirring echoes in the space of the workshop. "You've ruined everything for me. My career, my reputation, my future. Now I'm going to show you what true destruction is." There was only one work light on in the workshop, casting eerie shadows among the various woodworking machines. Wood shavings drifted slowly through the air, like fragments of time. Oliver looked at James' shaky figure and noticed that his hand with the gun was also shaking slightly. "You're drunk, James. Put the gun down and we can talk." "Talk?" James let out a mocking, maniacal laugh. "My father wants to talk. Sarah wants to talk. And now even you want to talk? No, it's already too late." His finger was on the trigger, but Oliver didn't move a muscle, just gazed at him silently, like he was observing a faulty piece of wood. "Do you know why I chose to be a carpenter?" he asked suddenly, his voice still calm as if he were having an ordinary conversation. "Because wood is always honest. It doesn't lie, it doesn't betray. Every grain of it is real. Unlike man, who can live in a mask." "Shut up," James growled, the smell of alcohol spreading through the air. "Who do you think you are? Nothing but a pathetic carpenter. Think revealing something will change anything?" He raised his gun, a mad gleam in his eye. But before he could pull the trigger, a loud clang of something heavy hitting the ground came from behind him. James subconsciously turns around, the slight distraction giving Oliver his chance. The strength honed by 20 years of carpentry was evident in this moment, and he moved as fast as a bolt of lightning. The sound of gunfire echoed through the workshop as bullets struck wooden beams high above, stirring up a flurry of splinters. James' wrists were twisted so hard that the gun fell to the floor and slid to the side, his entire body pinned to the workbench. Wood shavings fluttered around them, and Oliver's voice was low and dangerous. "I told you, impatience is the easiest way to make a mistake. It's like handling wood. One wrong strength can ruin the whole piece." Sirens sounded from far away, and blue and red light was cast through the windows, adding an eerie layer of color to the workshop. Daniel walks in through the back door, cell phone trained on it all. "Another perfect performance," he said, with the whole thing clearly recorded on the screen. "This video is going to send him straight to jail. Old Carter won't be able to bail him out this time." As James was being taken away by the police, Sarah appeared in the doorway of the workshop, her face pale. She watched it all, the perfect world she had once crafted crumbling before her eyes. "Are you satisfied?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is this what you wanted?" Oliver looked at his once wife and watched her carefully crafted image of perfection fall apart in the light. "No," he said, no smugness in his voice, only calm. "This is what your choices have brought about. I simply chose not to be silent any longer. Like these woods." He gestured to the pieces on his workbench. "They don't lie. They just honestly show what they are." Emily comes out of Daniel's office and stands in the doorway watching the scene. She didn't know when she came, but there was determination in her eyes. "Mom," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "it's time to go. This isn't your home anymore." Sarah looked at her daughter and opened her mouth to say something, but ultimately said nothing. She turned to leave, her heels making a crisp sound on the floor as she faded into the night. Peace returned to the workshop, leaving only the whisper of the machines and the aroma of wood shavings. Oliver picked up his tools again and continued the unfinished work. Emily walked over to her father and silently picked up a piece of sandpaper, skillfully matching his movements. They moved so silently, as if nothing had changed and as if everything had been different. "They'll never bother us again, will they?" Emily asked, the sandpaper in her hand making even lines on the surface of the wood. Oliver looked at his daughter, at the determination in her eyes that only comes after weathering a storm. "No more," he said. "Some lessons, like these textures, once etched never go away. But they also make us stronger." It was late at night, and the workshop lights were still on. Father and daughter work intently, with shavings floating quietly in the light, like fragments of time. The storm has finally passed, but the traces it has left behind, like the rings of years on timber, will remember this history forever. Oliver knows that some wounds never fully heal, but they become stronger marks, like those of wood that has been polished over the years and exudes a deeper luster. The world outside may still be noisy, but in this space filled with the scent of wood, they find their own peace. 5 years are like sandpaper in the hands of a carpenter, rounding the edges of life. The workshop had tripled in size over the years, and the new additions to the machinery were glowing with a new metallic sheen, yet still retained the same booming rhythm that had put Oliver at ease. This spring morning, he stood at his workbench and watched Emily mentor several young apprentices. "Grain goes where it naturally goes." Emily's voice was clear through the workshop. "Don't rush the force. Let the wood tell you the shape it wants." At 20, she had inherited her father's skills, those green eyes still bright, but with an added calmness. Her fingertips read the language of wood like her father did, transforming rough logs into elegant works of art. Daniel pushed his way in, the smell of motor oil still on his hands. "The new batch of oak has arrived," he said, "and is of good quality, just as you asked for." He looked around at the expanded workshop. "I remember 5 years ago this was just a small workshop. Now it's almost a factory." Oliver smiled and shook his head. "No, it will never be a factory. Every piece requires craftsmanship." He walks toward a white cloth-covered piece in the corner, a special hope chest he made for Emily's wedding. Emily will marry James next month, a young architect who understands the value of woodworking. "By the way," Daniel lowered his voice, "did you hear that Rex is getting out of jail?" Oliver's hand paused for a split second on the wood before continuing to move. 5 years. I hope he's learned something." As soon as the words were out of his mouth, an envelope was handed to him, postmarked from the state penitentiary. Oliver opens the envelope and Rex's handwriting is neat but weary. "Mr. Harding, I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I deserve it. But on my return to society, I want you to know that I have learned that I have destroyed not only my own life, but the trust and safety of a family. What I did to Emily is especially unforgivable. Over the years, I've tried to be a different person." At dinner, Oliver hands Emily the letter. She was silent for a moment as she read. "Do you believe him?" Oliver gazed into his daughter's eyes. "I believe that people can change, but that doesn't mean that the scars of the past go away. It's like fixing a broken piece of furniture. You can always see the cracks exist." The next day, an unexpected visitor showed up at the workshop. Richard Vance, Rex's father, is all gray at the temples. "I've been following your development," the old man said as he got right to the point, "and you've built an admirable business." The aroma of fresh wood shavings wafted through the air, and the roar of machines rose and fell in the background. "Rex's bail hearing is next month," Vance Sr. continued, "and he wants to make up for past mistakes." Oliver put down the tool in his hand and wiped his hands. "Make amends? Some things, once broken, can't be fully repaired." The old man nodded, as if he had already expected this answer. "I understand. It's just, he did change." "Perhaps," Oliver said, his voice calm, "but his path to redemption is not our concern. Like all this wood, each piece must go its own way and find its own form." Vance Sr. left just as Emily returned. She looked at her father's back and asked, "Will he come back?" Oliver shook his head. "Not anymore. Some stories are over." Sarah is also back in town, and Oliver heard about it from Isabella. Her father died, and she came back to settle the estate. She tried to reintegrate socially, Isabella says, but the town has long memories. Oliver just nodded and continued to focus on the task at hand. The shadows of the past have long since failed to affect his life. The name of the workshop was changed to Harding and Daughter Custom Furniture, and the new sign shone warmly in the sunlight. Some people say Emily should go to college and see what's out there, but she knows where she belongs. It's not just a job, she explained to a curious customer. It's a legacy about integrity, about quality, about doing things right. Oliver often stood in the doorway of the workshop in the evening and watched the setting sun gild the town. He remembered that stormy night and all the betrayal and hurt. But like his favorite black walnut, it has been polished over the years to give off a deeper luster. One day, the local business school invited him to give a presentation on business ethics. The students on stage listened curiously to this carpenter's story of integrity and quality. Someone asked about the possibility of forgiveness and starting over. Forgiveness is a personal choice, Oliver replies, but trust needs to be rebuilt with action. Like building a piece of furniture, it takes time, patience, and more than anything, sincerity. Emily's wedding was chosen to take place at the workshop, insisting that she wanted to start a new chapter in her life in the place that saw her grow up. Tools and pieces surrounded them to witness this special moment. Her fiancé, James, talks about learning woodworking and understanding the family's roots. It's not just the craftsmanship, he says, it's the principles behind it. In the process of building Emily's hope chest, Oliver is reminded of how things have changed over the years. Every piece of wood is carefully selected and every joint fits perfectly. This is not only a piece of furniture, but also a moral. Good work takes time, patience, and sincere commitment. Like their lives, they have become more resilient despite the storms. That storm 5 years ago changed a lot of things. Rex searches for redemption in prison. Sarah rebuilds her life in a foreign land. And the old Vance's company is handed over to new management. But the most important changes happen in the workshop. The bond between Oliver and Emily becomes stronger, their careers flourish, and most importantly, they find inner peace. Sometimes I wonder, Emily said one quiet evening, where would we be without that storm? Oliver stopped what he was doing and looked at the golden rays of the setting sun pouring in through the high windows. Life is like wood, Emily. Sometimes it needs to be weathered to reveal the most beautiful grain. In the workshop, the machines are still roaring and the wood chips are still flying in the sunlight. Oliver and Emily continue their work of turning logs into works of art and trauma into strength. They understand that true power lies not in destroying, but in creating. Not in retaliating, but in building something beautiful and lasting. Just like those woods that have been polished over the years and exude a warm and deep luster, their lives have settled into a unique flavor over the passage of time. The sky always clears up after a storm, and relationships that have been tested, like carefully crafted furniture, become stronger and more precious. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.